What if everything you believe about God is just a fraction of the truth? What if there is something so deep, so powerful, and so transformative that it could completely redefine your faith, your identity, and your destiny? I am who I am. These were the words that echoed from the midst of the burning bush, a statement that not only challenged Moses, but shook the foundations of humanity. But here's the big question: do we really understand what this means? Or worse, do we live as if this is real? After all, why do some people experience miracles while others merely survive in faith? Why do so many feel that God is distant when He Himself declared that He is eternal, present, and absolute? The divine name is not just a title, it is a revelation of a God who is not dependent on time, circumstances, or human limitations. He was not. He will not be. He simply is. This means that He continues to act, continues to respond, continues to transform. But are we paying attention to this truth? Many spend their lives chasing after something to fill them: security, recognition, purpose, answers. But what if I told you that everything you need has already been revealed millennia ago? That the God who said, "I am," has not changed, and He is exactly what you're lacking today. If you need healing, He is healing. If you need strength, He is strength. If you need a way out, He is the way. But the big question is not just knowing this, it's living it. Now, I extend an invitation to you. If you truly want to understand what this revelation means, why it changed the entire course of history, and how it can transform your life today, stay with me. But a warning: once you see this truth, there is no turning back. Your faith will never be the same. From the beginning, names have always carried power. In ancient times, knowing the name of something or someone was synonymous with having authority over it. And then, Moses finds himself facing the inexplicable, a burning bush that burns but is not consumed. The call is direct, undeniable, overwhelming. But Moses, like any of us, hesitates. After all, who is this that sends him to challenge the greatest empire of the time? God's response echoes through eternity: I am who I am. Simple, yet overwhelming. A name that is not just a name, but the revelation of an eternal, absolute, and self-sufficient being. God is not defined by something external. He simply is. And what does this mean in practice? It means that there is no circumstance that limits God, nor power that shakes Him. While kings need armies and pagan gods require offerings, God simply exists in fullness, immutable and sovereign. Moses needed to know this. He needed to understand that he was not being sent by a temporary force, but by the Creator of the universe Himself. Imagine being a simple man, a shepherd for years, and suddenly carrying the responsibility of confronting Pharaoh. If it were only by his own merit, he would never succeed, but if the one sending him is the one who simply is, then everything changes. This revelation was not just for Moses. It is for you too. In the midst of uncertainties, struggles, sleepless nights, how many times do we question, now what? What should I do? But God doesn't say, I was, or I will be. He says, I am in the present, in the now, in your reality. He is the strength to carry on, the hope to be reborn, the provision in scarcity, the healing in despair. It doesn't matter where you are or what you are going through, He is. He is the restoration you so desperately need, the blessing you haven't yet seen, the miracles that seem far away. But if God has already revealed Himself in this way, why do we still hesitate? The truth is, we are like Moses. The call scares us, the mission seems impossible, and we want guarantees. But God gives us only one certainty: He is with us. And if He is with us, what can stand against us? Moses still had much to learn about this divine identity. And you, are you ready to dive into this understanding and discover how this revelation not only transformed his life, but the entire history of faith? The situation in which Moses was born was not the most promising. Israel, which once enjoyed the favor of Egypt in the days of Joseph, now lived under the cruel weight of slavery. The Hebrews were growing in number, and this troubled Pharaoh, who, in his paranoia, decreed that all newborn Hebrew boys should be killed. Imagine the despair of the mothers, the pain of having a child ripped from their arms and thrown into the Nile. But God had already mapped out a plan. Moses, against all odds, was saved, hidden, and, ironically, raised within Pharaoh's own palace. The one who would be Israel's liberator grew up under the care of Egyptian royalty, receiving the best education and being prepared without even knowing it. However, even with all the comfort and privileges of the court, Moses never forgot his origins. The Hebrew blood flowed in his veins, and the injustice against his people gnawed at him. Until one day, moved by an uncontrollable sense of justice, he killed an Egyptian who was mistreating a Hebrew slave. This hasty act forced him to flee to the desert, leaving behind wealth, prestige, and any illusion that he could ever be a hero. Moses didn't know it, but that desert, which seemed to be his exile, was actually his training ground. God had not abandoned him. He was shaping his character, teaching him patience, humility, and true leadership. And isn't that how it happens with us? How many times have we thought we were forgotten, that our dreams have died, that the promise has been lost in time? But God even uses the deserts of life to prepare us for something greater. Moses was taken from luxury and brought to the simplicity of a shepherd, learning to guide sheep before leading a nation. Likewise, our moments of apparent inertia are, in fact, moments of divine preparation. While we think we're standing still, God is working, teaching, shaping. Don't underestimate your desert. It is in it that you learn to depend more on grace and less on your own strength. Time passed, and Moses became an ordinary man, living a peaceful life. Perhaps he had already accepted that this was his reality, that he would never set foot in Egypt again. But God does not forget his promises. When he decrees liberation, nothing can stop it. Moses didn't know it, but his routine was about to be interrupted by a supernatural event. The burning bush was waiting for him, and with it a call that would change not only his destiny, but that of an entire nation. Moses' life had already settled into the routine of the desert. He tended his father-in-law Jethro's flock without great expectations, not imagining that his destiny was about to change forever. But God has a habit of surprising us in the ordinary. It was on an ordinary day, amidst the silence of the desert, that Moses saw something unusual. A burning bush that burned but was not consumed. It was an intriguing sight, a paradox, something impossible to the human eye. And like every divine call, it awakened his curiosity. He drew near to see it up close, not knowing that this moment would change the history of an entire nation. Then a voice came from within the flames. "Moses, Moses!" Imagine the impact. The simple shepherd suddenly became a man, standing before the divine presence itself. God then ordered him, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy." It wasn't about the ground itself, but about the presence that now inhabited it. Moses, who had once lived in the splendor of the Egyptian court, now trembled before a burning bush in the middle of the desert. God was making it clear, what makes a place special is not its appearance, but the presence of the Most High within it. Just as it wasn't Moses' power that would change Israel, but the power of the one who called him. And how often does the same happen with us? We spend years in the desert, believing that life has become a routine without purpose, until God surprises us. But like Moses, often our first reaction is not euphoria, it is fear. "Who am I for this mission?" he questions. However, God does not respond with words of motivation or affirmations about Moses' qualities. The divine answer is simple and powerful. "I will be with you." Moses still didn't understand, but the success of his mission didn't depend on his ability, but on the presence of the one who was sending him. God's call always takes us out of our comfort zone. Moses was used to the silence of the desert, but now he was called to confront the most powerful man in the world. The fate of thousands of lives depended on his response. And here's the central point: God's call is never just about us. It's about who we will be for others. Moses was not called to become great, but to become an instrument of liberation. And you, have you already identified your own burning bush? God still calls, still speaks, still sends. And the answer he expects is not perfection, but willingness. The name of God revealed to Moses was not just an answer to a question, but a declaration about his nature. I am who I am is an affirmation of complete existence, without beginning or end, without the need for explanation or dependence on any external factor. In a world where pagan gods were shaped by human needs and linked to specific functions, a god for harvest, another for war, another for fertility, God presents himself as the absolute God, who does not need limiting attributes to be understood. He simply is. This statement dismantles any attempt to reduce God to a human concept. In Egypt, each deity had a restricted domain, but the God of Israel could not fit into categories. He was not one of the gods. He was the God. Unlike idols that needed to be carried by their worshippers, God carried his people. He didn't depend on temples or rituals to exist. He was eternal, immutable, sovereign over all and everyone. Moses needed to understand this truth because he was about to face an empire full of beliefs that limited gods to specific functions. He was not carrying a new religion, but the revelation of the Creator himself. And this hasn't changed. Even today, many try to fit God into convenient definitions, shaping him according to their preferences and limiting his action to specific moments. But he continues to be I am, present, active, unshakable. This truth challenges us to trust not in a God of occasion, but in the God of all eternity, who does not fail, does not change, and is not dependent on circumstances. If he said he will fulfill something, there is no force in the universe that can stop it. He doesn't just exist, he acts, he liberates, he transforms. If God himself defined himself as I am, then there is no reason to seek answers outside of him. We need to stop limiting our faith and understand that if he is, then we can be in him. Moses hesitated because he saw himself as incapable, but God was not interested in what Moses could do, but in what he himself would do through him. And so, without fanfare, without needing to prove anything to anyone, God was preparing the greatest liberation the world had ever seen. But the impact of this revelation would not end there. Time would pass, centuries would advance, and one day someone would return to pronounce these same words in an even more powerful way. The revelation of the divine name was not just an isolated event in the desert. It redefined the faith of an entire nation. For the Hebrews, who lived under the weight of slavery and Egyptian oppression, God revealed himself not only as a liberator, but as the unshakable foundation of their identity and belief. The people of Israel would no longer serve a regional God, limited to a geography or culture. They would serve the God who is eternal, self-sufficient, and sovereign over all. This knowledge transformed how the Israelites saw the world and themselves. They were not just an oppressed people, they were the people of I am. The impact of this revelation was so profound that it shaped the entire structure of the Jewish faith. While the surrounding nations relied on gods created by human imagination, Israel clung to a God who existed by himself and upheld all things. This truth would become the foundation of their resistance throughout history. When they were exiled, persecuted, and even almost exterminated, the certainty that God was unshakable kept them standing. The name I Am echoed as a constant reminder that God does not fail, does not change, and always fulfills his promises. But it wasn't just a theological matter. It was something practical, real, and applicable to daily life. When Moses went before Pharaoh, he didn't go just with a staff in hand, but with the authority of the God who does not depend on men, systems, or empires. When Israel crossed the Red Sea, it wasn't just a miraculous event. It was a demonstration that the God who promised liberation had the power to fulfill it. And every time the people strayed and returned to God, the name I Am remained the anchor that kept them connected to the Creator. If this revelation shaped Israel for generations, what does it mean today? Do we still trust the God who simply is? In the midst of the chaos, uncertainty, and instability of the modern world, this truth remains our firm rock. If He is the I Am, then our limitations don't matter, our fears don't prevail, and our struggles do not define our future. Israel lived for centuries with this certainty, and one day, long after, someone would return to pronounce this name in a way that would change everything once again. Centuries have passed since Moses heard the voice of God in the burning bush. The people of Israel preserved their faith, faced exiles, kingdoms fell, and new empires arose, but the promise remained. And then, in the midst of a chaotic world dominated by Rome, someone dared to say the same words that God had said to Moses, I am. Jesus of Nazareth, a carpenter from an insignificant town, began to proclaim truths that challenged the religious and political system of his time. He didn't just teach about God, he spoke as God. When Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am," the reaction was immediate. They wanted to stone him. The religious leaders knew exactly what this statement meant. He was not merely comparing himself to Moses or the prophets. He was claiming the identity of God himself. It was so bold, so revolutionary, that his simple statement was enough for them to try to kill him. But it didn't stop there. Throughout his ministry, Jesus used this same expression many times. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. This changes everything. If God revealed his name to Moses as I am who I am, and now Jesus uses this same expression to define himself, then he was not just a teacher, a leader, or a prophet. He was God incarnate. He was the fulfillment of the promise made since the Exodus. The I Am, who freed Israel from Egypt, now manifested in flesh and blood, bringing an even greater liberation, the liberation from sin and death. If Moses took the people out of Egypt, Jesus came to take humanity out of spiritual slavery. And the impact of this: if Jesus is the I Am, then he is not just a character of the past. He is present, alive, active. He continues to heal, to free, to restore. He is the blessing you need, the miracle you are waiting for, the transformation that can change your life. The same God who called Moses now calls each of us to a life of renewal and faith. But do we understand what this means? Do we trust the I Am, or do we still live as though we are bound to the past? And if Jesus has already revealed his identity, the question that remains is, how does this impact the way we live today? From the beginning, God not only revealed himself as the I Am, but also as the God who liberates. Moses was not called just to know the divine identity, but to be an instrument of a redemptive plan. Israel was bound in the chains of slavery under the dominion of an arrogant empire that thought it could control the destiny of a chosen people. But God always has the final word. The I Am was not just a theological statement, it was a promise of action. He came to break yokes, overthrow oppressors, and fulfill what he had determined. Slavery was not the end of the story, but was this liberation only for Israel? Not at all. The same God who brought the Hebrews out of Egypt still acts as the liberator. How many today live as slaves? not of physical chains, but of fears, insecurities, addictions, traumas, emotional wounds. God has never changed. He continues to break chains, restore destinies, and lead his people to a new beginning. The Exodus was not just a historical event, but a picture of what God does in the life of every person who seeks him. He finds us in the desert, calls us by name, and leads us to a land of promise. Just as the Hebrews had to cross the Red Sea to leave slavery behind, we too need to take steps of faith to live in that liberation. It's not enough to just know the truth. We must act based on it. Moses had to rise up, challenge Pharaoh, and lead the people out of Egypt. Similarly, when God calls us to something greater, we often need to confront our own internal pharaohs, doubts, fears, and destructive patterns. But the good news is that he goes before us, making a way where there once seemed to be only impossibilities. If God is the liberator, then the question remains, what is still imprisoning you? What chains need to be broken in your life? The I Am does not just promise liberation, he fulfills it. But are we willing to leave Egypt and trust him to lead us to something greater? Or do we hold on to our chains simply because they are familiar? The invitation for freedom has already been made. The question now is, will you accept it? Or will you stay trapped in what God has already declared is not your destiny? If there is one thing the revelation of the name I Am makes clear, it is that God does not change. In a world where everything is fleeting, where kingdoms rise and fall, where nothing seems permanent, God remains the same. His sovereignty does not depend on circumstances, politics, or human opinions. He rules above time, space, and history. When Moses asked who was sending him, the answer was not just a name, it was a declaration of absolute authority. I Am means that God has always existed, always will, and nothing can alter him. And this truth changes everything. If God is eternal, then his promises never expire. What he declared about Israel's liberation was not an improvised plan. It was something determined before Moses was even born. Likewise, God's plans for your life are not accidental. The promise he made to restore, transform, and renew the history of his people is still valid. If he said he would lead us to victory, who can stop it? When he makes a way, no opposition can close it. But trusting in God's sovereignty can be a challenge. We are impatient. We want immediate answers. We want to understand every detail of the plan before we take the next step. Moses hesitated too. He questioned, doubted, and tried to flee from the mission, but all the while God gave him one guarantee: I will be with you. And in the end, that's the only certainty we need. If the I Am is with us, then there is no storm that can destroy us, no desert that can stop us, no enemy that can defeat us. And if God is eternal, then our faith must be as unshakable as he is. The problem is that we often place our trust in things that pass away, in temporary solutions, in forces that wear out. But what would happen if our trust were fully anchored in the one who never changes? Would we live with more peace, less fear, and more courage? The I Am continues to reign, continues to be faithful, continues to fulfill his word. The question is not whether he will do it, but whether we are ready to truly trust in him. Many look at Moses' story and think, this happened thousands of years ago. What does it have to do with me? The answer is simple. Everything. The same God who revealed himself to Moses as I Am is still the same today. He continues to liberate, heal, restore, and transform lives. And if this truth is still in action, then the big question is, are we living as though God is a present reality or just a distant concept? Because if he is the I Am, this means he is here, right now, ready to act in your life. But do we have this awareness in our day-to-day lives? How many times do we let fear, doubt, and circumstances speak louder than the voice of the one who never fails? The people of Israel saw extraordinary miracles, yet they often forgot who God was. We are no different. When difficulties arise, we often forget that we serve a sovereign, eternal, and limitless God. He hasn't changed. We've changed how we see Him. And this affects the way we live, how we pray, and how we face life's challenges. If God said, "I am," then this means He is everything we need. Lacking peace, He is peace. Lacking provision, He is provision. Lacking healing, He is healing. The problem is that we often chase after answers where they don't exist, seeking temporary solutions for problems that only God can resolve permanently. The I Am not only sees your pain, but He has the power to change your reality. But this requires something from us, faith. Because trusting in the I Am isn't about understanding everything. It's about resting in the fact that He knows exactly what He's doing. So the final question is, how does this transform your life today? Are we still trying to fight our battles alone when God Himself has already declared that He is our sustenance? If Moses had refused to believe, the people of Israel would have remained in Egypt. If Jesus had not declared, "I am," our faith would have no foundation. What are we doing with this revelation? God has already said who He is. Now it's up to us to decide whether we will live based on this truth or continue as if nothing has changed. Now that you know the deepest revelation of God, what will you do with it? Knowing that He is the I Am changes everything, but this truth only has impact if you choose to live it. The problem is that many continue to walk as if they are slaves to the past, to fear, to doubts, when in reality, God has already declared liberation, transformation, and rebirth over their lives. So I ask you, will you continue living as if you were in Egypt, or will you cross the sea toward the promise? Moses had to make a decision. He could have ignored the burning bush, run from the call, and continued his ordinary life in the desert. But he chose to trust in the I Am and saw the impossible happen. And you, are you ready to take that step of faith? If God is everything He says He is, then there is no battle you cannot win, no miracle that is out of your reach, and no promise He will not fulfill. But He only fully manifests in the life of those who choose to believe. The invitation has already been made. God doesn't just exist, He wants to act in your story. But now the choice is in your hands. Are you ready to let this revelation change your life? If yes, start now, share this knowledge, strengthen your faith, and continue learning more about the I Am. Oh, and before you go, don't forget, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep receiving content that will strengthen your spiritual journey. What lies ahead could be the greatest transformation of your life.